All right, everyone. I'm Toby. I'm with the Laborers Union. I'm a regional organizer, troublemaker, what have you. And should be the exciting part. This is the part of the presentation we really want you guys to watch, interact, learn from, because we're going for the money. All right? We've talked about it. Now we're going to go find out where it's at. We start from the basic premise: taxes. What is taxes? Taxes is what the government we pay so that the government provides services, housing, all the things that we've talked about: streets, roads, schools. This presentation that you're about to see is about a political crisis, not a budget crisis, not necessarily even a revenue crisis. It's a crisis that's political because the 1% have the money. This is a political crisis. We have to go get the money. And we call this crisis austerity. That's the title that you're going to see over and over again here. We call this presentation in particular the Portland's Tale of Two Funds. Like many other localities nationwide, there's one set of funds is for all the services. Roads, streets, schools, that sort of thing. That's what we end up fighting over. That's what they get us in a room to fight over, is where the money should go. But there's also another set of funds, and these set of funds are the ones we're really going to bring to light in this presentation. These funds are primarily used to lure the 1% to Portland. Get them here so that they can make jobs for us all. How many people have heard this term? Shared sacrifice. Well, what is shared sacrifice? Shared sacrifice basically is what I was talking about just a second ago. When we go into an economic downturn, what they tell us is we're all suffering. All of us are suffering. The rich, boy, they're not doing as well. Working people aren't doing as well. People who are on the lower layer, they're not doing as well. And we all have to come together to sacrifice so that when we come out together better. And we're told right now that the city is broke. They have no more money. If you look at, if we can go on that a little bit more. If you look at the city's budget, they're going to tell us we're broke. You're going to see red lines. You're going to see that money's not coming in the same way. And the fact of the matter is that that is kind of a con. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in reality, when we talk about shared sacrifice, the question is who is doing the sacrifices? The 99% is. This is not a budget crisis. If this were a budget crisis, everybody's been broke in this room. What you do, you figure out a way to get more money. It's that simple. When this budget crisis in Portland happened, we were told, we went into what is called budget advisory committees, and we were told in these committees, no revenue. Don't look for new revenue. You can't have it. We have to make these cuts. And so the reality is that the city wasn't treating this like a real budget crisis. They took away our only tool, which is to raise revenue. We couldn't explore it. So basically, I want to finish just saying that what we're going to look at where the money is we have two presenters here who are going to be presenting. One of them is Lewis. And Lewis, I don't know, you may want to do more of an introduction of yourself, but he has been a huge help in the Where's the Money Committee looking at urban renewal funds. So, can I turn it over now? All right. Oh, yeah, one more slide? Well, we'll breeze through this because I really want to get to Lewis's point. Let's go. All right. Okay, as we were saying earlier, this is a political crisis. Austerity is designed to serve the 1%. City ends up looking good. And one of the big assumptions is that this is what their assumption is, the 1%. And this is what they sell. Privatizing and cutting services, lowering wages will actually lead to growth. Yeah, it sucks right now, but in a few years, the private sector is going to explode, and jobs that were formerly done that were public services are going to be done privately, and it's going to be great for everyone. And the final point that I want to make is that austerity, at the end of the day, it's anti-democratic. You can call it what you want. We could talk about money. We could talk about dollars and cents. But the fact is anti-democratic. All the things that they talk about, those forefathers 200 years fighting for, this is democracy actually being taken from you. Because you're not actually getting a chance to make real decisions over the money. You're fighting over the crumbs. So that's... Okay.
So let's me and Erica just introduce ourselves real quick. We've been staring at a lot of numbers and sort of behind computer screens for a while, and now we're out in front of the public. So my name is Louis. I have a lot of hats. I'm a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. I've worked with a bunch of other unions and different community groups, and I identify with the labor movement most closely. Erica, you met her earlier, works with laborers and has a long history of organizing and troublemaking. We want to have 3 sections today, what we're going to talk about. The first section is sort of long-term budget trends, how we got to this situation and what the historical moment is that we're in right now. The second section is going to be about internal service funds, which is one pool of money that the city's not telling you about. And one, you know, you all heard about the $5 million for schools that Sam Adams magically found under some rock. Internal service funds are one of those rocks where he looked under to find it. And the third thing we're going to talk about is urban renewal money and urban renewal financing, which has been thrown around a little bit, and it's both locks up revenue and is pretty anti-democratic. Okay, so Erica, you want to tell us what this chart says?
Well, this graph exemplifies the phrase of the day, which is, I'll just do it without the mic, which is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's obviously true in Oregon also. The red bar on the right shows how the top 1% of income earners have seen their share of their slice of the pie grow over 60% since 1979, while the slice of the pie has shrunk for the bottom 80%. That's these in the blue. So the income group in Oregon that pays the lowest share of their income to state and local taxes are the highest income households. And the income group in Oregon that pays the highest share of their income, the lowest share of their income, I got that mixed around. The lowest share of the income is done by the highest income households, and the highest share comes from the lowest income households.
So how did it get this way? One of the main ways here in Oregon is that we've developed over the last 30 years an aggressive tax system. Instead of taxing the rich more, we're taxing the rich less. Instead of taxing the poor less, we're taxing the poor more. So in 1973 to 75, the corporations paid 18% of the total revenue for the state. That's just corporations. That's not millionaires. It's just, just corporations. In 2011, 2013, they paid 6.4% of that. So over the last 30 years, we've had a drop of 1/3 of the amount of income coming to the state from corporations, where the money is getting made. So in 2011-13, as Seamus mentioned, these increases in taxes on the rich and big corporations that were passed right after the financial crisis, Measure 66 and 67, were allowed to expire. The cost of allowing them to expire was a total of $118 million of state revenue that we lost because those expired.
So at the same time the tax burden is lightened for the rich, the poor have had to bear an insane tax load. Oregon is actually one of the worst in the country for putting the tax burden on the poor. You can see, that Oregon is actually 4th in taxing the poor. We have prizes eventually.
So this doesn't just mean, these aren't just facts and figures, these are real people. So in Portland, the number of people living under the federal poverty level, which is at 23,000 for a family of 4, is 16.3%, or 95,000 people. And for the whole state, it's 14%, or 536,000 people. So these are real people who are being affected and harmed, who are actually being forced to pay for the services that they need just to get by the system that's doing it.
So corporations are incentivized through tax breaks to open up shop here and create jobs. That's the justification, right, for giving incentives. But are they really contributing to our economy when they get away with making so much in profit while local budgets are slashed and the rest of us get poorer? This is an issue of corporations paying their fair share for human needs, just like we all do. And we have the chance for a prize here. We are benevolent ones. We give away gold coins.
All right, so the net income for Intel in 1995 was $3.5 billion. That's total. That's from their official annual report. They paid in taxes to the state level to Oregon. They paid $54 million. What do people think that their net income was in 2010? Someone have a guess?
0.
Throw out a number. What's that?
8 billion.
8 billion. Anyone else?
15.
15? 10.
0.
All right, so the answer is 11 billion.
Who said 10? Okay. You were closest. So, point for you.
And Toby, quick. So the amount that Intel paid to Oregon in 2010, what do people think?
20 million.
0.
It's actually a trick question.
34.
We don't know. They're not required to say. But we do know that they paid they budgeted to pay $4.5 billion overall in all their taxes. That's in every district they're working in. So it can only be a small fraction of that they paid for Oregon.
So it's a small fraction of 4-point-some billion?
Yeah, but we have no idea what it is because we do not have a transparent government. We don't get to know what these people where all the money is. We don't get to know what we're getting. Oh, okay. So who thinks the city has enough money to meet its expenses for this year? Right? Even though we're told that we need to make cuts, right? We're told that the park bathrooms need to be closed and high schools need to be closed. So who thinks that we actually don't have the money we actually do have the money to pay for those things?
Okay.
The answer's right. Yeah.
You guys are right.
Yeah.
So now we're going to answer the question of, I don't have enough chocolate for all of you. It's a budget crisis, okay? So now we're going to answer the question of where's the money in the City of Portland's budget. The city has money. In fact, its assets are increasing. For 2010 through 11, overall, the city's assets continued to exceed liabilities. And at the end of June 2011, the city recorded total net assets of $2.5 billion, which was an increase of $169 million from the previous year. And the city enjoyed a 14.6 increase in current assets, considered a sign of financial strength. So, as I described earlier, though, at budget crunch time, parks, transportation, and recreation are told to take big cuts. This year, it was as much as 8%. So here's two quotes. The city's current financial condition is very sound and the envy of other cities of similar size and complexity. Later, Mayor Adams says, these are ugly but necessary budget cuts. How could both these statements be true? Well, the city is not broke. This supposed budget crisis is centered around what the city calls a budget shortfall. And a shortfall doesn't mean that the city doesn't have enough money to meet its obligations. It's just that they estimate they will bring in less revenues than they projected. So again, this less than expected revenues is the supposed shortfall. But just because they predicted more money in revenues doesn't actually mean that there's not enough money in their coffers to go around for the basic services that we all rely on. There is, as we've said many times. There's still enough money in the city's assets to fund these services, and the public is relying them even more so right now during hard times like these. So where is this money? You can find the city squirreling away the money that they have in internal service funds. Internal service funds are unrestricted net assets in the city, meaning that they can be used for any purpose, including for essential city services like the ones they've been threatening to cut. And you can see here, in 2010 through 2011, we were going to do a prize for this one too. So, dun dun dun, shocking, shocking how much it is. $120.6 million is how much they have right now in the fund balances. Now remember, this money is not going towards paying for services. It's just sitting there. The ideal is a responsible practice is for the city to keep the internal service funds tending towards zero. And obviously they're not.
So just to compare, the total Parks Department expenditure, how much money it took to operate our parks last year? Well, $104 million. And how the total transportation budget for last year was $240 million. So these are roughly on the order of the total expenditure budgets for important bureaus.
And this money allows City Council to have a stash for pet projects. And as Toby described earlier, it lures the 1% investors into thinking that the city is loaded with opportunities for private sector expansion. So even though, and I know I was mentioning shortfalls, even though the city has this money stashed away right now to deal with problems that need to be fixed right now, it still does face a revenue problem in the near future, right? Because it looks like the economic recovery is going to happen very slowly, if some would say if at all. So they'll continue to get less revenues than they previously expected. So here's where the really damaging part of austerity in this model comes in. How do they deal with these supposed shortfalls? How do they deal with these shortfalls? They cut services. Again, I'd give chocolate to you all if I just had the money. They don't have to cut these services, though. There is an alternative to these cuts. The City Council could use internal service funds to provide basic services, and they could develop a revenue plan for the long-term future, which would require the 1% to pay their fair share. We're not done.
We're not done. We've got more to slog.
But it is true, and I'm glad you're clapping.
Yeah. So the consequences of choosing cuts and choosing austerity are pretty ugly. We have crumbling infrastructure. We have... Keep going. Just put them all. We all know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Labor expertise will dwindle, right? You won't have the people to do the work, and who can handle emergencies, and who can fix problems with infrastructure.
All right.
You can see all the problems.
Yeah, you know the problem. We know the problem. All right.
And the economy is really, really bad.
So that's internal service funds. And the moral of the story is they're choosing to cut services and put the burden on working and poor people instead of creating revenue and using these giant pools of money to fill in whatever gaps they need to fill in. Another thing that the city is doing that's hurting that's causing this crisis and serving the 1% is urban renewal. So you guys, many of you in the room probably know the word urban renewal as a land use strategy and a development strategy that is linked to building big shiny things and displacing poor and low-income communities. But when the city talks about urban renewal, they're not always talking about that general process. They're talking about a specific and very complicated financing practice that they use to fund these big, shiny things, and often leads to displacing poor and low-income people. So the way urban renewal works is that the city creates a designated area as an urban renewal area. And then it says that any increase in that, in the property value in that area, the taxes from that increase don't go back to the city. Instead, they go to the Urban Renewal Agency. They go to the PDC. And the PDC spends that money on new projects within that community and in that neighborhood for building shiny things and improving property values even more. So this is also known as tax increment financing, or TIF, because you're financing things off the increment that you increase the tax.
So here in this graph, the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is the property taxes generated over time. So you can see here that over time, as property taxes grow, the city and the other districts actually only make what they did at the time the urban renewal area was created. And the new taxes here in green all go to the urban renewal area.
So the fantasy here is that this is a no-cost way of financing projects, right? Because the city isn't foregoing any revenue, they're still getting the revenue they would have gotten. And these new projects pay for themselves because they create the increase in property taxes that they use to fund the projects. The idea is kind of like putting a bubble around a neighborhood. And under that bubble, all the new taxes stay in that bubble and get refunded back in. And then after a certain period of time, the bubble gets taken off and the city gets to collect those new property taxes. That's the fantasy of what they want to see happen.
I kind of like that idea, though, of a bubble. I could do all my shopping in the bubble. It sounds like a nice little bubble. What's wrong with that?
I expected more from you. So Director's Park, right? This is we're going to do a prize for that. Cool. I was the prize. But this is Director's Park, which was a project that the city says could not have happened without TIP, without urban renewal money. So let's talk about what's wrong with this picture. A park that gets used by Occupy every week. Not so bad. The first thing that's wrong with TIF is that there's no way to evaluate the effectiveness of these programs. The best economists have been able to show is that urban renewal money decides where property values increase, not whether property values increase. Next. The next thing wrong with it is that it locks us into a priority of creating profit and creating good business climates in neighborhoods rather than serving the needs of the people. The idea for an urban renewal area is that you want to create new property values. You want to create good business climate in that area, and that we are required to do that, that we are locked into doing that in that area for the length of the urban renewal area. The next thing is that we'll trap the revenue that will come from these increases in property value, most of which would happen regardless of the urban renewal process, traps them for decades. We're not talking 5 years, we're talking 30 years. And the next thing it does is it foots the bill with the maintenance. Director's Park was a giant capital project. But for the property value that was increased for Director's Park, none of the increase can go to funding the increased maintenance costs it is to keep up that park. And instead the city is paying for that. Another important part of thing that TIF does is it displaces people. When you create a place like the Pearl District, which is really nice, we have to remember there were people who were living there before. There were communities that were there before. The first urban renewal project in the city of Portland was creating the Rose Quarter. That was a historically African American community that was then displaced further out. And there was a choice made. Either we have this African community, or we're going to have the Rose Quarter. And the choice was the Rose Quarter. And the final thing it does is it takes power away from the people. So rather than it being in the hands of the communities to decide, it's in the hands of urban development experts sitting in the PDC who decide what an effective development strategy is going to be.
Okay. So here are the numbers. But we have a prize, so I need people to raise their hands for this one. How much of the city is in an urban renewal area in terms of acres? Any idea?
Percent.
14%.
What's the percentage? 25?
32.
7.
2, 10,
15.
15. Okay.
The answer is 14%.
14%. You get it. And why should
No, we didn't listen to you.
why should he get it for 15?
So 15 is actually an important number because that's the legal maximum, according to the Oregon law of renewal, that they're allowed to have. So they're super close to having as much as they possibly can, and they're driving it as fast as they can. Another important thing to remember is 8% of the property value is actually locked into that green area of the graph, where it's not allowed to be taxed. It's not being taxed by the city. The tax is being collected on 8% of the property value of the city is not going to the
It's
city.
going to the PDC, right?
What's that?
That is going to the PDC.
It's going to the PDC.
Got it.
Next question.
Oh, okay.
All right. So the total number of property taxes collected in Multnomah County, which is all the taxing districts, schools, fire department, county, city, was $96 million of tax money that would have gone to all the taxing districts, went to urban renewal. That's just last year. For the city, it was around $35 million. And for schools, it's around $24 million. 1 year. That's the next one. Okay. So, remember I talked about how these things were supposed to be a bubble, that you take off the bubble after a little while, right? And then you collect the new money that was grown underneath it. These urban renewal areas, the average length that they last is 32 years of the 11 in the city. The maximum is 50 years. That downtown waterfront has been an urban renewal area since 1884. 1984. Sorry, not anyway. Since 1984, it's been in a 1974. Sorry, 1974. It's been in an urban renewal area. If there's any growth, which literally means the city is collecting taxes on that urban renewal area as if it were still 1974. So, these are about revenue, right? These are about locking away revenue into urban renewal projects. But it's also about cash, funds sitting there. And the bottom line of all these urban renewal area budgets are the line for contingency. What contingency means is money that's not definitely legally earmarked for something, and they're not concretely budgeted, but it's for projects they'd like to do down the road, and in case their water main breaks in the building and they have to replace the computers or something. The total amount of money in all the urban renewal areas that's locked away in that totally unrestricted money is $35 million right now. And that's money that the PDC can do whatever they want with it, but because it's in urban renewal funds, the city is not allowed to touch it. We legally can't do it. There's ways to do it, but where there's a will, there's a way. But right now, we're not allowed.
So it's similar to the internal service fund and this tale of two funds, that there's money sitting there, and it's just cash in funds that aren't going towards services.
And just as an example, when Governor of California Jerry Brown came into office, he one of the first things he did was call for all this kind of liquid urban renewal money to be pumped back into the state to fill their giant budget holes, and that was shot down by strong lobbyists in the developer community. And this is a comparison to what these figures are. The shortfall, just for all you guys to remember, that this city is crying broke over, is $17 million. So, next one. So just to recap, what is the big picture strategy that's going on with this urban renewal money? Urban renewal money straitjackets revenue. It locks revenue into certain kinds of projects, and it hoards funds away in certain certain bank accounts. Also, urban renewal money is spent exclusively on making big shiny things, which are all well and good, but when we're in a situation where we need to be funding schools and libraries and not cutting services, big shiny things are the last things we should be worrying about.
And maintenance.
And maintenance, yeah. the other thing that urban renewal money does is it's explicitly designed to serve businesses and serve profits. And it's very, very explicit about that. It wants to create good business climates. But the problem is that we don't have a choice. Once you create an urban renewal district, that's what we're going to do with that money. So when we're saying we can't create a permanent tax district for the libraries because that'll make us inflexible in our budgeting, but we are saying we're going to make basically permanent tax districts for urban renewal that are going to last for 50 years, and let that inflexibility continue in our budget. And lastly, they're anti-democratic. PDC decides how $96 million a year is getting spent.
So we just want to do a recap, summary. City's not broke, right? Right. Everybody knows that now. There's money squirreled away in these funds.
Is there a contingency fund under than that 120 million?
Yes. Why don't we have
We'll do question
discussion
and answer
afterwards?
then,
Yeah.
And the last thing is that the austerity is not a matter of being fiscally responsible. It's a growth model that serves the 1%. It's privatizing. It's shrinking it's shrinking the social safety net, and it's a political stance.
So above all else, know that shared sacrifice is a myth. There's no such thing as a shared sacrifice.
The last thing is that working people didn't create this crisis, so we shouldn't be the ones who pay.
So we were going to ask some questions, but maybe I should just answer that question quickly. Oh,
Let's take us back maybe a few questions.
Yeah.
And then do a little Q&A. So you were number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And then we have questions for you guys, too, because we were going to do a group discussion, so we should just have one big group discussion. So the first question was whether there was contingencies in the internal service fund.
Aside from that.
Aside from that.
Yeah.
The city has other reserves, yes, but those reserves are the ones that are actually taken from the bureaus that could be delivering services. It's kind of complicated, but that money otherwise could be used for services and are taken out to go into the internal service fund.
How do you make the top 1%, the people that have all the money, the people that's in control of the money? It's been several other organizations and people besides yourself that tried to make them understand that how you guys feel. How are you different, and how are you going to make them release the money or somewhat get the money from them?
I had a good catchphrase that I like to use all the time that I mentioned in the breakout group I was in before, which is direct action gets the goods. Mm-hmm. You put yourself in the line, and you raise the social cost of not doing what you want, and they'll do what you want.
Yes.
I have a question about the internal revenue fund. So there's 120 million in there right now.
Mm-hmm.
How long have we been sitting on that fund? Does it grow each year? I mean, we're pulling money out of departments so we can be spending it. But if you close it down now, what will be there next year?
So they have been growing every year. Since 2000, they've been growing. And I think in 2000, it was somewhere in the $80 million range. And it's just been growing and growing and growing. And like I said, the alternative to that is to actually spend it on what people need now, because our infrastructure is actually deteriorating. Our assets are going to poop. So, but they could develop a revenue plan to tax the 1% in the meantime, instead of just going on this perpetual cycle of cutting services. Our city services have been taking cuts for years now.
So the superintendent told us yesterday that we should come up with a plan to save our schools by proposing a 5-year plan to show an investment, to show a source of funding. Can you point to this as a source of funding?
Yes, but I also want to say, I think that we could definitely from this research find lots of sources of funding. and find lots of ways to blow holes in their argument. But I also want to say that I don't want us to get lost in the weeds of these kinds of numbers. I think that we need to be a little visionary about this and say, and not just propose little tiny tweaks, but propose bigger, more visionary demands that are going to change the playing field, right? And so yes, we can get off in whether we can move some money, the PDC can do an internal fund transfer to the to the city or the schools or whatever. But we can also say that we want to defund the Justice Center or something. There's bigger things that we can also talk about.
Yeah, I did. So you spoke about the 120 in the internal service funds and the locked-up money in the urban renewal fund. I'm wondering what legislative or political barriers stand in the way of bringing up that money. And since you spoke to the matter of more radical demands, one thing that I would really like to see is a progressive slumlord tax. A tax on exploitative rents to pay for public services. Because there's people off the Hawthorne corner paying $1,200 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, and that's
Just to answer the first part of your question about whether any of that money in the internal service funds can be freed up, the figure I gave you of $120 million was actually just the unrestricted amount. It can be used. It can be used for anything that council prioritizes. There's money on top of that that's set aside, that's not unrestricted, and is legally held there for whatever reason, or they have to pay it in the future. It's an obligation in the future. But the $120 million can be freed up for services that we all need.
just takes a vote.
And I think that the reason why we wanted to frame it as a political situation was that this is a matter of getting the interests that are in control of this money to do what we want, and that's just a matter of organizing and building our own power.
Is what you're calling the internal reserve service fund, is that the same as what Mayor Adams calls the general reserve?
No.
Because there is an amount in the general reserve that is probably required to maintain our AAA rating.
Right, exactly.
So that we don't have to spend too much
This
on bonds. But that is beyond.
This is above and beyond.
Not the reserve.
Right, this is above and beyond what's needed to be there for a good AAA bond rating.
Can we get a show of hands of who has questions, and we'll bring those back to you. And 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's close this down. And we'll close it down, and we'll do a discussion after. Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. One of them is, they appoint the Portland Development commissioners, and how do we get some of our own representation on it? Someone like Teresa, who was speaking earlier so eloquently about us needing proposals. So that's one. Do you know the answer?
The PDC is a semi-public, a quasi-public entity. So some people are appointed by the commissioners, and some people are what are called stakeholders, who are business leaders from the city, who are not appointed, who are decided by the previous board of the PDC. We're next.
Yeah. So my question was about the income tax that was levied in, I think, 2003 by Montgomery County. Do you know about that?
So maybe I don't know.
The special tax that they did, yeah. The one was that the one that saved schools. It was an income tax.
It was an income tax.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So what sort of coalition made that happen? Or why did they do that then, but we're not talking about it now?
I recall that coalition was between Mayor Potter at the time and Multnomah County. That they said, okay, we got it. But I don't know how much of it was civic driven or not. But yeah, it was like a $300. I think I got hit with a $300 tax bill.
Well, I actually want to piggyback up on, it's using public money, but it's quasi-private public, and I just think that we need to address that and say, like who's watching these people, and when they're appointing each other, That's not a public entity. It's a private entity that benefits private people, and then the whole, 70% of the coffers of the, re-election funds for these people are made up of developers. So it's very, I don't know if I have a question. I'm just going, I was going to ask, is it private or public? But I don't even think it's even public at all. It's
So there was one more.
So I totally get the drive to privatize, but my question is, how does it even serve the 1% when we have a totally crumbling infrastructure?
Yeah.
There's money in destruction. There's money in not maintaining. There is money in letting this stuff fall apart, because then I'm sorry.
So no, there's a really important analogy of what for that, right? What's one thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II. Why did World War II get us out of the Great Depression? Because we destroyed billions of dollars of investment that then companies could get and rebuild. So we want to let our bridges crumble so we can hire a company to rebuild.
That's right. That's right.
There's one more question, and then I want to ask a question to kind of further discussion and wrap it up. So, go ahead.
I had a question and a short comment. But does Portland have a ballot initiative process like the state does? And if it does, couldn't the coalition be built to try and put initiative on the ballot to raise the taxes of the people, the wealthy, people that make $250,000 a year and up? And the comment I wanted to make was, we've got this reserve fund. I forgot exactly how you depicted it, the $120 million. That's a fixed amount. You got to, in my opinion, I think you should be that money should be used for services, but we should work together so that people who want their schools saved aren't going to be doing that at the expense of a library, for example, or something like that. So it's important that we don't just fix our focus on the money that's immediately available, but we want to raise the revenue to satisfy all of our needs. And if we don't work together, we'll all lose.
Right.
So we want to ask a discussion question, but before we get into that, I want to just point out to you guys that the city wants to create a new urban renewal area around PSU, which was mentioned earlier. That would be a 34-year lifespan, have $169 million of debt that it would take on in its lifetime. And the city is having a public hearing on that on May 9th. There's flyers on your table, May 9th at 2 p.m., and they're having the final vote on May 16th. And so if you want another time to say how bad you think urban renewal is, that's a great time.
So, just in terms of going forward, what else do we need to know?
Who are the developers? We need to name names about the people that are profiting off of this stuff. Name the names.
The logic is very good for the PDC while land prices are going up. I don't see any logic for that while prices are going down. None. The comment.
There's a little complication around that, which is that because of the way Oregon property tax system works, we are sort of guaranteed property value increases every year, and so it doesn't matter how much property market value is increasing, but the taxable value is still going to be increasing every year. It's complicated. Go ahead.
Well, I would just point out that, if we've got a quote-unquote $17 million shortfall, and there's $120 million in the internal service fund, that more than takes care of it. When it comes to the urban renewal funds, I like good union construction jobs. I'll be honest with you. Any construction job that receives more than $500,000 worth of state funding is automatically Davis Bacon or prevailing wage. And when I was working as a carpenter, I was paying in excess of $300 a week in taxes, to public services. And I had no problem with that. I would love more construction jobs. I'll pay all the money. I'll pay taxes, for yin-yang if I'm working, So I like urban renewal jobs. My big problem is that these urban renewal projects, they're not determined by the community. I'm sick of us being led around by our noses by these developers and these banks that tell us what they want built, and we don't have a damn say.
I think that gets to the point. It's not necessarily that we don't want those jobs. It's that what are they building, and also who is the tax burden on? We have been showing how the tax burden actually is falling on the majority of us, but the 1%, the corporations who are actually benefiting from those urban renewal areas, are getting breaks.
And I just want to add to that. The issue is not about whether to build new shiny things or not build new shiny things. The issue is if you're going to build a new shiny thing, you should have a plan for schools, for public services, for all the things that are needed when you're making this plan up. They don't have a plan currently.
I was going to take it back off of what the lady at this table said. One of the things that we can do now, when you bring in all of those facts and figures, I think that we need to identify all of the boards that are included, and we need to demand inclusion. I think that if those boards are comprised of the people from the city, and we demand that they're comprised of those boards from the city, that we'll have more oversight and accountability, there will be more transparency. But right now what I've seen is that a lot of those boards have continuing board members that are coming through over and over again. Even though the terms are described as a 6-month or a 12-month term, you have people chasing boards around as if they're playing a game, and they're just sitting on the same boards that are studying and benefiting each other. So we need to demand that type of inclusion, if nothing else. Become political, become a part of the process. But that's something that we can do as a volunteer basis. We need to change those boards out. They need to include us. So I think
I'm just going to comment on that. I think this is the step to make it more inclusionary, to make the process more inclusionary. When you get to those boards, like we kind of talked about, no matter how inclusive, supposedly, of the community they are, they've had their hands tied because they're given all cut solutions. They have to deal with cuts no matter what. There's no other option according to what's given to them on those boards. What we need also is a different framework for those boards, that's what this is doing.
Okay, just one more, and then we'll hold on. Go ahead. Are other hands up? Okay, 2 more then. You were first, I think.
Okay, so I just want to talk about maintenance. I was in skilled trades, and I worked for Detroit Public School System, and what they did here in Portland is they laid off all but one carpenter, and then they go, the buildings got shot to hell, they let them go to hell, and then the developers come in and they say, well, we're going to build you a new school. Isn't this horrible? Or we need a bond. So then the bond funds the destruction. So they would much rather give money to developers rather than to maintenance and all that. So we can't fall for that false divide that, construction unions should align with the developers. Their interest, if they hired enough carpenters to keep these schools going, that would be green. Although, what's green about building a huge, skyscraper out of all this new material? What's green is maintenance. And I am all about, we got to make maintenance sexy, whatever you got to call it. You got maintenance is where it's at. It's like you ride your car and you give your kid a car or something, and then they don't put any oil in it, and then they go, I need a new car. I'm sorry, no. You don't need a new car. You need to put oil in it and maintain it, and learn how to maintain it yourself. So I'm just saying there are living wage jobs maintaining, and but they like to think the ruling class. Maintenance is invisible to them. Like cleaning people, the people that clean those shiny buildings that they like to kick us out of are working people that they're paying shit wages to. So I'm just saying, maintenance is where it's at. Okay.